Welcome to the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History's podcast series. This podcast features Fayetteville Natural Heritage Association President Bob Caulk and Mount Kessler Greenways member Frank Sharp as they discuss efforts to preserve Mount Kessler, a 387-acre woodlands area in southwest Fayetteville, Arkansas. The program was recorded February 19th, 2014.
Okay, I'm Frank Sharp. I live on the poor end of the mountain, and Ann Pritchard lives in the upper scale, south end of the mountain. You all beat us here by many, many years. The Johnsons came in 1908. Oh, 1908, that late. Okay, yeah. And they had the Johnson Pear Farm, which is on the south end of the mountain. And they have about 400 acres there, maybe. A lot of it in woods. And her brother...
Most is in the land trust, Ozark Regional
Right.
Land Trust.
Right, her brother put a couple hundred acres in the Ozark Regional Land Trust. So, are you all familiar with Mount Kessler? You know where it is? Everybody does? Okay, west of Fayetteville. Yeah. And in 2000, and I guess, you know, I'm going on the mountain, not paying much attention until I really get radicalized. And when we opened a smokehouse on Dixon Street, not where we are now, but where Lamar Pettis' office was. And my dear friend Paul Lewis said, well, Frank, you're in town now. You ought to join our merchants group. And I said, okay. You know, I wasn't much of a joiner, but I went to their first meeting, and they were to tear the old post office down. They were tearing all the square, you know. And I said, Paul, that's crazy. He said, it's too late, you know, it's already a done deal. And then Cy Sutherland, do you all know Cy? Wonderful, wonderful man. He's done historic preservation all over Arkansas. He agreed. It was just ridiculous. He said all those maple trees would die with all the construction and demolition and what have you. They were going to put a fountain there, which would end up with newspapers in it and paper cups and stuff. But anyway, so we started a petition drive, and everybody, too late. And you think last night we had 150 people in City Hall. We had a meeting in the firehouse. We had so many people. Little old ladies, everybody just, don't tear it down. And too late. And one of the few times I've agreed with John Paul Hammerschmidt. But he was great. I mean, he would send you a Christmas card. You'd send him a letter disagreeing with him, but he was great with his constituents. And Cy was on the state historic preservation, and so he called John Paul's office, and in a day they put that building on the National Historical Register, which means federal funds couldn't tear it down. And there was moaning and groaning, you know. But anyway, I felt sort of the same way in 2004. Not exactly, but I grew up on that mountain. We hunted day and night, you know, went all over that mountain. None of the neighbors cared if you came on their place, as long as you shut the gates and knew which direction to shoot. And so anyway, I thought, well, in my lifetime I had to worry because those valleys and stuff would develop for this old rough mountain. 2004, a group bought the Lewis Cummings property. And I think it was around 800 acres they ended up with, and they were to put, I can't remember, it was like 3,000 apartments and 630 square feet of commercial and McMansions all over the place, you know. And so they had a charrette at the Bank of Fayetteville to get input from people. And we pointed out that that trail going to the old Kessler winery was built in 1866, you know, and we all used that trail. We used to haul wood on it, and it was really critical to keep that open. And we formed a group called Mount Kessler Greenways of just neighbors, and our motto was, as we grow, let's keep some country. We're not anti-growth, but, you know, let's keep our growth like along Cato Springs Road and areas where it can be serviced, and then let it be a big natural area next to it. And so they agreed. The first group was not very sympathetic. I mean, the planning group I didn't think was very sympathetic, but the second group, Appian Design, came up with a much more sympathetic plan, and they agreed to donate 200 acres to the city of Fayetteville and for a regional park. And then they also had additional, like a couple hundred acres of green space scattered around. And so that was better, you know, than the original plan. And so then they were able to borrow $25 million from Chambers Bank. And then the economy tanked. And so Chambers ended up with, that 800, 900 acres on Kessler, and at the smoother part along Cato Springs Road. And at that point, the Chambers was very generous. They went ahead and honored that pledge of 200 acres for a regional park. They didn't have to do that. They did it. They just, and then they allowed the Ozark off-road cyclists to build trails on that acreage. And we were amazed at how many people started using those trails. They were first coming off Finger Road. There wasn't room to park, so they began parking at the smokehouse and coming through our property. I talked, I had no problem with coming through our place. And Jane, you all know Jane Steele? Jane said no problem going through her place and went through. We had about 4 property owners. And our lawyer said, you better get a waiver in case they get bitten by a copperhead or fall off a bluff, and sue you. So, we asked people to sign a waiver. We also, though, asked for their email addresses. And so we built up an email list of about 800 people and started a campaign to see if we could save that 376 acres, just rough. Well, you can see Bob's picture. Bob's already on the map.
It's right there.
But it's really very, very expensive to develop. And the first thing I did is went to the mayor and said, Mayor Jordan, how do you feel about this? I want your blessing before I start this campaign. And he said, I'm behind you 110%, but we don't have enough money for it. And so I said, well, we'll see what we can do about getting funding outside of city money. So I went to my dear friend Bob Caulk, who had saved 100 acres on Mount Kessler and the Brooks Hummel property. And so Bob took it to his board, and they agreed to donate to raise $300,000. That's why y'all are here tonight. Today. And they also voted to make that their highest priority. So, Bob, I may just this introduction may be the whole talk.
Yeah, it is. We can go now.
No, I'm getting carried away here, but I also think. We just had it was a lot of work. We had a lot of luck. Let's see, 3 years ago, this woman from Bentonville called me and said there are 8 of us that walk once a month in different places. And I've heard about there's some beautiful property on Kessler. Would you mind if we hiked it? And I said, no, that'd be great. And they said, well, we'll be there about 9:30 and hike for a couple of hours. I said, well, let me fix you a little light lunch, salad and soup or something. They said, well, we've never done that before. It sounds like a good idea. So I immediately then called Bob Caulk and said, Bob, we're having these people hiking. And I called Patty Irwin. Does anybody know Patty? The state urban forester now. Called Patty. And so these 8 women hiked. We had a great party in our garage, and they had salad and soup and stuff. And they got to meet Bob and meet Patty. Patty gave a little talk about urban forests. And fortunately, one of those women was Lynn Walton. You've heard of the Waltons? Okay. Yeah. And we had a great time. They got muddy. The trails were there were really not many trails, and it's mainly mud. And we had a great time. And so they wanted to pay for this salad and soup. I said, no, this is just a party. So Lynn, anonymously, but we got the return address. So anyway, sent Bob $300. And that started the Mount Kessler Fund. And it's now about, what, 6,000? Unless you've spent more.
You're keeping track, I'm not.
Okay, about 6,000. But anyway, then they came again, the same bunch came this past spring, and we had a young man, Alan Edmonston, who's a university student, doing a tree ring analysis. We found out that some of those trees are 300 years old. And so Alan, young, attractive student, took them on the hike and showed them the trees and showed them the rings, the borings he had done, and just really charmed them. And then also, Tom and Stuart had biked it. We have the Ozark off-road cyclists have their monthly meetings usually at our place. And Tom and Stuart had biked it, and they were very much aware of it. So I sort of scribbled almost in the back of an envelope. I think I used 8.5 by 11, that what I thought it would take in the way of money. And does anybody know Gary Vernon? Gary works for Walmart. He's, I don't know, sustainability, something or other. And he's also the president of the Friends at Slaughter Pen Trail. And so I called Gary. I started working on a report. We got letters from everybody in the world, you know, university professors, students, tree huggers. Got all these letters of support. And the Star Shopper Stafford Associates, who I'd worked with for years on color catalogs, we came up with a pretty slick-looking 85-page report. So when it came ready, the Staffords came up with a real professional-looking report, and I called Gary, and I said, Gary, I've got this report. Could I get you a copy? And he said, well, I'm in Crested Butte, Montana, but I'll be back in my office Monday. I said, well, great, I'll deliver it. I said, is there any way you could get this to the Waltons? He said, well, they're out here with me, all by. So Monday morning, I called him, and he said, I thought, you know, it might be when he returned his call. He's been out of the office for a week. And so about 30 minutes later, he called and said, I'm back in town. And I said, well, I'd like to sometime give you these reports. He said, well, what about this afternoon? I said, fine. So I met him up at the High Roller shop in Bentonville, gave him reports, and gave him about 4 for the Waltons. He said, I'll get them to them this afternoon. And I also had that piece of paper scribbled out what we thought we'd need. So then Bob got on the internet and got the forms we would need to fill out, you know, to get a request, which was scary to me. I'd never asked for a grant. So then Stan Johnson, who is our neighbor on Washington Mountain, they own 400 or 500 acres up there, 300 or 400 acres up there, and they have 3.5 miles of trails. Stan knew Rob Brothers, who's with the Walton Family Foundation. So he called Rob, and Rob said, oh, we've already assigned somebody to that. And you said that they had actually been looking at it for
quite some time
before that.
Yeah.
And Bob, then I gave Bob a copy, and he gave it to the Walton family. And so then, didn't hear anything until out of the blue, $1.5 million because we thought it'd take $3 million to buy it. So then last night, the city voted to match that grant with another $1.5 million. And then there's another $100,000 to build a temporary trailhead, because they're going to start covering that landfill, and they'll start just very shortly. It'll be finished first half in June, the second half after that. And so there'll be dump trucks and bulldozers rushing up and down that Judge Cummings Road. So there'll be a temporary trailhead until they get all that finished, and then probably up where those water tanks are will be close to that's adjacent to that trail system of 8-something miles. Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to turn the rest of the program over to Dr. Caulk.
Okay. Frank went through just about everything that's in the talk. So but what we have here, this is basically the talk that was given to the City Council last night and has been given a number of other places. And it talks about Kessler and how the community has come together to demonstrate the value of Kessler to the community. And I'm going to start at the end and then come back to the beginning, which is about 12 days ago now, the city finally went public with what was going on. And this was the newspaper article from Friday, February 7th, where they announced the land deal. And they announced all the results of the negotiations with Chambers Bank. This is what was going forward. And as Frank alluded to, this is last night, and there's Frank and his wife Sarah, and you can see the surprise on her face. The council room was full. The crowd last night matched the crowd that we had for the Mount Sequoia back in 2003, and it's the second time probably in Fayetteville city history when everybody in the room was on the same side of the issue. That doesn't happen in Fayetteville often, but it happened for Mount Sequoia, and it happened here. And in fact, in Mount Sequoia, one of the councilmen wanted to vote against it, but he whispered to the council person next to him saying, I can't because nobody spoke against it, so there's nobody for me to hide behind. The property itself is right in this area on this Google map. The red line coming down here is the Razorback Greenway that's being constructed down connecting Bella Vista to Fayetteville. And you can see this area will make a beautiful southern end for the Razorback Greenway. And in addition to being a Fayetteville park, you can see it's right between Farmington and Greenland. So it's going to end up being a regional park and be able to be used by these two folks. Frank talked some about the property itself. The 376 acres is shown right here. This is an older map where some of these green areas that show park out in here are going back to Chambers Bank, and so that their property is contiguous, and then Chambers is giving this property or parts of this property to the city in exchange to make the contiguous regional park bigger. The regional park that's going to be under construction is right in this area. It'll have ball fields on it of all sorts. It'll have bathrooms, parking lots, all the things you need to support a natural area that we'll talk more about up here. Frank did mention that there's 3 conservation properties in the area. He mentioned the pear farm right down here. Frank has a conservation easement on some of his property here, and then this is Barbara Mormon's property up here that has a conservation easement on it also. Frank didn't wave a copy of the prospectus at you, but if you ever wanted to look at it, it's a couple 100-page book, and there's a link to this on FayettevilleNatural.org. The property itself was identified by a number of groups, by the Fayetteville Natural Heritage Association way back when as one of the top conservation properties in our area. We did a study in 2006 that was funded by the U.S. Forest Service and the Arkansas Forestry Commission, and one of the properties that was identified as having the highest conservation potential in the Fayetteville area, right in close to Fayetteville, was the Cummins property that is right in here, which is in fact the property that will become the regional park and the Kessler Greenway. The city of Fayetteville took this 2006 study of ours and used it to define what they call the Enduring Green Network, which is part of their land use plan for the Fayetteville city. And you can get all of that on the city website. One of the areas we envision using this is as an outdoor classroom and laboratory. Here you see some advanced placement science students from the Fayetteville High School talking to this guy would be an entomologist about the bees and stuff that he has in there. But their class has visited there and done tours of it, and we've had University of Arkansas classes visit there, ecological assessment classes visited there. In addition, in looking at it as an outdoor laboratory, Joe Neal and Frank got Dave Staley, who runs the tree ring lab at the University of Arkansas. I got him to walk up on the hill one day, and after being up there about 10 minutes, Staley started jumping around because he was identifying post oaks that he thought were probably 300 years old and chinkapin oaks that he thought were over 200 years old. And he got all excited and he says, I have a graduate student that would love to do this. And so here you see the graduate student actually taking a boring. This is Alan Edmondson. He spoke at the city council last night. Alan has actually laid out 2 permanent study plots on the mountain so that once he finishes his research and sort of defines what the base condition today of what these plots are, future students of Staley can come out and do additional studies on this. And that's quite exciting. Here you have one of the cores that Alan took out a little picture of it. He's doing the analysis of these cores right now, and you can do things like learn about what the climate was like, how much rain there was every year, et cetera, et cetera. You can learn all kinds of things about the way it was here back in the 1750s. To more formalize the outdoor classroom ideas, we were able to get a grant from the National Park Service through their Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program to actually, over the course of this year, develop an outdoor classroom plan. Guy Headlands, who runs the local office of this, is the person that's involved with this. They will be having their first meeting of their steering group next week. And their goal here is to come up with an outdoor classroom plan involving teachers from the Fayetteville High School, the Farmington High School, perhaps the Greenland High Schools, and develop sort of a teacher guide, determine what needs to be done along the trails to put together things for the kids to see. And I'll show you a couple slides later of some really neat things that are up there. Hopefully they'll make a lot of progress on that this year, but I don't expect that'll be done this year. It might take into next year. Outdoor recreation was the next one. Frank had mentioned that the off-road cyclists have built a number of trails up there. And you can see the trail map that is here. And this is over at the end on Frank's property where the current access point is. And once the city takes title, there will be an access point over on this side so that we can increase the usage, because parking on Smokehouse Trail is kind of iffy. And some of the people that live up there are already putting up, please don't block the driveway signs. One of the other groups, obviously the cyclists are users of the trail, not necessarily the biggest user, but another user are runners. And last November we had the first annual Mount Kessler trail run. Limited participation to 160 people, sold out in minutes. Everybody had a great time, and this time around sponsors are already lining up. And so the second annual trail run has been set for November 1st of this year. And we expect that will be a significant moneymaker towards the target that we'll talk about in a second. Hikers, obviously there's lots of hikers that go up there. You have the Ozark Highland Trail group here. This is a group from the Fayetteville Athletic Club, and this is the Walking Club of Northwest Arkansas. Frank has been keeping records on a trail log of who the users of the trail actually are, and today the data shows that 65% of the users are hikers, and the other 35% are evenly split between bikers and runners. And the bikers, you say, well, shouldn't they be higher? They're building the trails. Turns out the trails they build up here are fairly technical trails, and if you're not a really good bike rider, you only ride it once. And I know some really good bike riders that have fallen up there, and one of them broke her collarbone. So it is a very technical trail. You need to know what you're doing to ride big parts of the trail. I'd mentioned that it's right at the base of the developing trail infrastructure in northwest Arkansas. And this slide just shows, this is where Kessler is, right down in here. And you can see that this is the current northwest Arkansas trail plan that's being updated right now to expand it out away more from the Razorback Greenway. But you can see on Kessler, the long-term plan is to eventually have a multi-use trail coming down Rupel Road, going up the mountain on this side, going over and connecting to the regional park. And coming down on this side, you'll have a Cato Springs Trail that comes up to the regional park. So you'll end up with a circle on the multi-use trail here in South Fayetteville. And hopefully we'll eventually get the trails connected out here to Farmington and down here to Greenland. Trails like this and this kind of greenway really does pay off. This is a slide from a presentation that the Alta folks have given before. But really, when you're trying to attract businesses and when you're trying to attract young professionals to work at these businesses, quality of life is a big issue. How do you compete with other locations? And trails and outdoor activities are a big deal. In fact, we learned way back when in Fayetteville that when Procter & Gamble built themselves a new headquarters, one of the stated reasons for staying in Fayetteville instead of moving up closer to the person that they're working with most is because at that point Fayetteville was the leader in trails. And they could put their office right on it, Mud Creek Trail, and so that their folks could use it. Also, this just says that you make money from this, that for every buck invested in trail system and greenways, you make $3 in revenue. Stan Johnson, that Frank mentioned, made the point last night that he's gone all over the country to ride his bike. And every time he goes to some place and rides his bike, he leaves happier and poorer. Because he says he goes and he spends a ton of money because he's having so much fun that he doesn't pay any attention to how much money is coming out of his pocket. Another reason for having this property, and I didn't stress it back there when we had the map up there, but the property actually straddles the two major watersheds. About 70 acres to the west, on the west side, is in the Illinois River watershed, and around 300 acres to the east side is in the White River watershed. And so this is a very important property from the point of view of watershed protection also. And obviously we all know that the White River watershed is where we get our drinking water from, so that anything we can do to protect that is good. The sub-watershed that actually makes up Mount Kessler up in here is the town branch of the West Fork. And the West Fork is an impaired stream, impaired primarily for sediment, and the sediment comes from runoff, eroding banks. So anything you can do to reduce building in that sub-watershed is something that will keep maximum flow rates from going up and keep erosion from going up. And on the Town Branch watershed, we just have some data here that shows that from 1999 to 2006, there have been significant drop-offs in the forested area and in the pasture area, and a similar increase in the urban area. And that pattern is continuing. And so doing something like this will slow that down in a small way and will in the long term be good for us. Kessler Mountain actually sets right on the dividing line between two EPA ecoregions. The Springfield Plateau dissected to the north and west, and the Boston Mountains to the south and east. And because of that, you'd expect it to have a diverse habitat. And in fact, there was a 1926, the Naturalist Guide to the Americas, 1926, that the only site that it mentioned in northwest Arkansas was Mount Kessler. And it mentioned Kessler because it was an area where its conditions were right, where it could support both northern biota and southern biota. And as I pointed out last night, one of the things we've all seen is in the wintertime or in the fall when the leaves change, the mountain turns red. Sugar maples, northern tree, southern end of their range. And Doug, who lived up there for 10 years, pointed out that some years he would go out in his yard and he would find birds that would normally breed in the north would be nesting in his yard. And the next year he'd go out and he'd find birds that normally breed in the south would be nesting in his yard. And so it's in an area where it can support both types of habitat. In order to more fully understand and define the diversity up there, we're pursuing trying to get a rapid terrestrial ecological assessment by working with a botanist from the Natural Heritage Commission in the state. And that assessment would further define what's there and would be the first step in developing a management plan for the site from the point of view of being a natural area. This slide just has some of the things you might see on Mount Kessler if you go slow. You can't ride your bicycle and see these things, you got to walk. Top thing is a spotted salamander, 6 to 10 inches long, lives in hardwood forests and needs vernal pools to breed. All these pictures were taken by Joe Neal on Mount Kessler. The first two pictures were taken in January of last year on a very warm day. The little frog on the side is a spring peeper, inch to inch and a half long. I made the comment last night that it was warm enough yesterday if you were up on the mountain they might have been singing. I don't know. The one I really like is this one, which is a rock. And if you look at the fossils in it, that's a sea fossil. That's a seashell. That whole area was once under the sea, part of the Gulf of Mexico, before I guess it was called the Gulf of Mexico. But there are fossils like this in rocks around the area, and this is the kind of thing that you want to be able to find these and get a little soft surface trail back into them so that the school kids can come back in and learn that this ain't a mountain really, it's a plateau, and that these kind of things are up there. The package to make this all happen, Frank has talked about the Walton commitment and the cities accepting that their thing and going out and buying it. But another important part of getting the city administration willing to go forward with something like this was a commitment by the Fayetteville Natural Heritage to lead a community effort to raise $300,000 towards this. We've done this with Mount Sequoia, and we raised a lot less money, but we raised significant money for Hummel Nature Reserve also. In return for the $300,000, we will be asking for a conservation easement and language in that easement that talks about how we'll go about managing the area as a natural area. People that would be involved in that would be the off-road cyclist, FNHA, the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust, the local Audubon Society, and a couple of University of Arkansas faculty members that might have an interest in this kind of stuff. And we passed out all of our donation forms that we had printed last night, so I don't have any to pass out here today. This slide is a beautiful summary of what Kessler's all about. This was provided to us by a University of Arkansas student who was part of an ecological assessment class that visited the mountain. all the talks that we had last night, all 11 speakers, and I just went through all of their stuff, they painted a picture where the residents of Fayetteville and the area around here have already demonstrated the value of this property to the community. It would be a shame to let that go. And the City Council completely understood that and voted to make it happen. This was the last slide I used last night where Frank got the standing ovation that was on the front page of the paper today. What I didn't talk about last night was the secret weapon in this whole thing. And it's not Frank. It's that wood-fired pizza oven he built, and he fed thousands and thousands of people. And that is the end of it.
Will you all
Questions?
entertain some questions?
Sure.
How many acres is in the preserve?
376 acres is what's in the preserve. The city purchasing 328 acres, I think it was, and the Chambers Family Foundation is donating 48 acres to make it to 376.
Any story on the name of the area, Kessler?
Philip Kessler moved here from Germany, and with $11,000 in gold and a new Surrey with a beautiful team of horses. And he started a winery on the south end of Kessler. Back then, all the wells were hand dug. And Mr. Kessler needed so many gallons of water per minute for his winery. So he talked to the well diggers, and said, what do you charge? We charge $1 a foot. That was pretty much standard. It was about a day's wages back. This was 1866. And anyway, Mr. Kessler built the trail that went all the way through our place up to the crest of the mountain, all the way down the south. They said it took a day on a horse and buggy to go down and buy your wine and back to Fayetteville. And anyway, Mr. Kessler then said, well, how far do you have to dig to get water up here on the mountain? And they said, well, we have no idea. And he said, well, I don't want to go into this, paying $1 a foot. I might not even get water. Depends on how deep I have to go. Nobody, said sorry. Except this one well digger down at Farmington said, okay, I'll dig your well and I guarantee whatever gallons a minute you require, and I'll do it for $100, guaranteed. They shook on it. So he gets his peach limb out, walks around like that, and dug 6 feet. And that is true, that well is there now. Hershey and Denise Garner's on their place. It's about 6 feet wide, about maybe 10 feet deep. And there's I don't know, I'm not really that much into peach limbs, but I think what happened, there's a pond up on the top of this mountain, no watershed into it, and it's always the same level. You know, Doug, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's always full. It can be drought, it can be deluge. It's always the same level. I think that man with his peach limb knew, about where another one of these, whatever it is, water. So that well is there today. And you can come up and visit Hershey and Denise Garner's place, the old Mount Kessler Inn, and that well supplies all their water.
I don't live in Fayetteville, and I've read about some of this in the paper, but my question is, has there been any concerns? As I understand, this is kind of rough, pretty steep terrain land. Is there any concerns with the bike trail thing, how much damage that does or not?
That is a concern. And you notice that we were asking to get an environmental assessment done to define the important biological areas, and we're asking for a management plan so that we can get in there with the biologists and the cyclists so that we can place the trails where it makes the most sense from a biological point of view. We have 376 acres. We had better be able to find a place to put those trails on that 376 acres that allow us to preserve the important natural features. Now, we will probably end up eventually building more trails than that, but they're likely to be dead-end trails that go off of one of these hiking, biking, running trails to an important geological feature or important biological feature that can take these school kids from the parking lot down a little ways and then off on this dead-end trail that has low use because since it doesn't go anywhere, your high-impact users, your bikers and your runners, aren't going to go there. And, you know, your off-road cyclists, yes, they do build trails with a thrill in mind. But they also understand that building a trail going straight down a hill creates an erosion problem. And so what they do, which is almost as bad, is they put 1,000 switchbacks going down that hill. And you can put in enough switchbacks that you can turn a hillside into a piece of property that has the ecological value of a parking lot. So you have to find the right balance. And so the trick is, I think, is to get the people that understand the biology involved in the process before the trails are drawn on a piece of paper. The process like that doesn't take long at all. The first thing that's going to happen is the city of Fayetteville needs to build an eastern access. So they'll be building at least a temporary parking area up there, and they'll have to connect into the trails. The parks folks that will be laying that out have already said that the folks that I've mentioned earlier will be involved in siting the parking lot and laying out the trail plan. Could we make a mistake because we have done it before the really good botanist gets out there and looks at it? Yes, we can make a mistake. But we reduce the chance of making a mistake. Now, there's about 6 miles of trail within the preserve right now. There's some trails that are off on private land. That 6 miles may go to 12 to 15 miles of trail, so you're adding 6 or 8 more. That doesn't have to be done tomorrow. That can be done over the next year or two. We'll undoubtedly have most of the rapid biological assessment done before that happens.
Doesn't it seem like you'd be less likely to make a mistake if you started with walking trails first and then moved to bike trails?
But no, it's walking trails can be just as bad. I mean, a trail is a trail, and in fact, you know, the data shows right now that the trail usage is primarily walkers. And in fact, when you look at some of the trails around here that are particularly sad looking, it's not the bikers that have done it, it's the walkers. A biker will build a trail through an area, and then all of your bike riders will stay on that trail. If the trail's the least bit wet, a walker will go around the edge. And then the next walker goes a little further out to keep getting his or her feet wet. In a period of a couple wet seasons, you end up with a 20-foot section of trail that has become a 20-foot diameter pig wallow. It's just this big mud puddle. But the walkers are still going around the edge, and they're making it bigger and bigger and bigger. So who's the bad guy? Right. We are, people. But in order to spend that much public money on something like this, you have to have access.
Is Ken Smith involved with making the trail, planning the trail?
He can be if he wants to be, but right now Ken is spending most of his time actually building a section of trail east of us. He's leading work parties out there. Ken was donor number 1. The day that on the 7th of February, when that first newspaper article hit, Ken's was the first check to show up. He can be involved if he wants to be.
Will your bike trails be separate from the other trails? So bikers and walkers will definitely share the same trails, because I know around Lake Fayetteville you have mountain bike trails and they're not the same, and so they don't.
You have a paved trail,
right,
it's the multi-purpose trail,
right,
and then the soft surface trail is for bikes, walkers, and runners. And when I walk on those trails around Lake Fayetteville, about 50% of the people I see on the trails are bikers, and the other 50% are walkers.
Right. Are you going to have horses up there as well?
No.
Or no horses?
It's in the city.
Are the master naturalists going to be involved up there working with you to do different things, trail building and?
I haven't talked to them yet, but
Oh,
the
you should.
suggestion was already been
Yeah,
made.
Definitely.
Hey, this all happened kind of fast. We want the expert to do it.
I know how mountain bikers are, and I just want to be clear on this. They are going to share the trail. They're not going to have their own trails up
No.
there, even though they have developed those trails, because
Yeah.
there's been a real fight around Lake Fayetteville about this. So I'm just.
Actually,
'cause have
I'm
you
not
ever been around mountain bikers? I mean,
Yeah, oh yeah.
well, I'm a biker, but not a mountain
yeah,
biker.
I've been around mountain bikers, and you've got two kinds of mountain bikers. You've got the people that know what they're doing, and you got the yahoos. And the yahoos are the ones that have never taken a course in how to be a mountain biker. And they're the ones that come down a hill and scream, "Get out of my way!" when they're about a foot away from you.
So it's not going to be a thrills trail then
Thrill trail for them?
for anyone. I mean, it's going to be a nice trail.
It's going to be a nice trail, but it's still going to be a very technical trail for the biker because it has a lot of stones on it.
And the walkers as well.
Huh?
It'll be technical for the walker too, obviously.
Yeah, walkers. Yeah, it is.
Right.
Yeah, that's my point. Is the number of bikers that are going to be out there is going to be very limited, because as I said early on, and you were probably here, that your novice off-road cyclist is going to ride that trail once and say, "I don't want to do it again," if he lives through it.
I've had a lot of input. People want an intermediate trail for people like you, that they're bike trails, but they're not the technical trails. So I would think that the additional trails they will not be the mountain biking trails the mountain bikers will stay up on these other trails mainly. Our trail log has showed that 15% of our users are mountain bikers, 15% are trail runners, and 65% are hikers. So hikers are much in the majority. But there will be some, there's been a lot of requests to have an intermediate trail system that would be much slower and easier to hike.
I've got a question. Looking forward, now that we have all of this at this point, what ensures that this is still preserved 20, 30, 100 years in the
It'd be under
future?
a conservation easement, just like there's the other conservation easements.
So who is, after you've passed, who are you passing this baton on to do the work of preserving it for the next generation?
Yeah, the city, we have asked for a conservation easement, and the city will grant one. Right now, I'm discussing with Terry Lane of the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust who should be the conservation easement holder. Should it be FNHA or should it be the Land Trust? There are some real good reasons why it should be the Land Trust, and so that will go forward. In that easement, we will try to make sure there's language in there that provides for a management scheme for this area that protects the natural features of it. Actually, the Walton Family Grant spends more time talking about protecting it as a natural feature than it does talking about building trails, though it does mention building trails. And the city's going to own that area, and it's going to be parkland.
I want to thank Mr. Caulk and Mr. Sharp for their presentation, and congratulations again on your feat and your long time dedication to this. Thank you.
This podcast was produced by the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. We welcome your comments. You can email us at Shiloh, that's SHILOH, at springdalear.gov. If you'd like more information about our podcast series or about the museum in general, you can visit our website at shilohmuseum.org.